So, welcome back to Talks with Interesting People, where we explore big ideas with brilliant minds. Today's guest with me is Dr. Melanie Gubbels-Bupp, a professor, researcher, and immunologist who's doing fascinating work at the intersection of biology, nutrition, and hormones. We'll dive into two of her studies that explore short-term malnutrition, and how that reshapes the immune system in ways that are surprisingly fast and relevant to our real life. So Dr. Gubbels-Bupp, I'm so sorry. So Dr. Gubbels-Bupp will help us break it down to understand its relevancy to our health and resilience. Let's jump in. All right. Thanks so much for being here. So we'll
Thanks for
start
having
for,
me.
thank you. For listeners who aren't scientists, explain the immune system and some of its core jobs for us.
Yeah, that's a great question and one that I could like talk for days about, but I'll try I'll try to, give a succinct, helpful explanation, hopefully. Um, so I usually like to talk about the immune system in ways that students have experienced. So I think about my students, what have you experienced? And we've all had a cut. And when you get a cut in the skin, you have a group of immune cells that are the innate immune response that come to the site of the cut right away, and they're eating up anything that might have come in through the skin, through that break in the skin, if it's bacteria, viruses, fungus, whatever. And those cells are our first fast-acting cells, and they do a lot of important things, but they won't be the focus of what we're talking about. So I'll just mention they're there. And then they kind of hold down the fort as best they can while they go and recruit help from the part of the immune system that I'm most interested in, which is the adaptive immune system, which is slower to act and includes T cells and B cells. And the thing that makes the adaptive immune response so powerful is that these cells are each of them are slightly different from their next door neighbor, and that each of them is specific for, say, a different pathogen. So if we have a billion T cells, maybe one or two can respond to HIV, maybe one or two can respond to malaria, so on and so forth. And that real specific specificity is what makes them really effective in combating infection. So to make a long story short, once you get those T cells involved, they can secrete signaling messages that kind of coordinate the overall immune response. And what I find really interesting, is that the way they coordinate the immune response is catered to what kind of pathogen and where that pathogen is replicating with respect to our cells. So if a pathogen is replicating on the outsides of our cells, like many bacteria do, then a T cell will often help a B cell make antibodies. Antibodies are big, they're very much able to get to those bacteria that are on the outsides of our cells, and the bacteria kind of toast. But if there's a pathogen that's replicating on the insides of our cells, antibodies can't get there, and T cells will, there's a whole bunch of different ways they can address it. But instead of doing the antibody response, maybe there'll be a cytotoxic killer T cell response where the T cell kills the infected cell. And there's a bunch of flavors to that that I won't drone on and on about, but I love that part. I love how the T cells really match the response to kind of the behavior and the lifestyle of the pathogen.
Yeah, I would love for you to drone on and on about that. I think I mean, the complexity when I got to study things, everything else, not everything else, but a lot of subjects I could kind of compartmentalize. You get into the immune system, and it is so complex and I don't know, just miraculous the way that it can identify and create specific attacks um, and adapt. It can have never ever had an exposure to any kind of that pathogen before, and it can figure it out. Yeah. So, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but so I think of the innate immune system as basically just kind of firing blanks at everything. There's no specificity. It's just kind of like, it's just going to try and attack while the adaptive immune system gets its stuff together to figure out this specific identity of what is this? We need to create a specific response to this. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think we are appreciating a little bit more now that even the innate immune system
Mhm.
is tailored to the type of pathogen. So they are certainly 100% less specific than the adaptive. They're not, lock and key to the pathogen, but it does turn out the
Ah,
messages that innate cells will secrete differ depending on what kind of pathogen. And innate immune cells they don't have the same kind of receptors that T and B cells have, but they do have receptors that recognize patterns on the outsides of pathogens. So an innate cell can determine, oh, this is a gram-positive bacteria, or this is gram-negative, or this is a virus, or this is a fungus, or whatever. So even in that early response,
Man, that's
it's
amazing.
non-specific but still tailored.
Has that been, so I haven't been in immunology in 20 plus years. So has it been in the past 20 years or was I just not paying attention that day?
Oh
It
gosh,
doesn't matter. I
I
was
would
curious. I
say
was
at
like,
least
I wasn't paying
maybe like
attention.
the 80s is when the
Okay.
1980s. So it was
Okay, I'm
before
not
we
that
studied
old. Yeah, I'm
immunology,
not
but
that
to be
old.
honest, it wasn't my focus either.
Yeah. No, I love the adaptive immune system and the complexity and its involvement in autoimmunity and cancers and all those sorts of things. Anyway, okay, yes, so many more things we could talk about, but I appreciate that was a beautiful, succinct explanation for an insanely complex and brilliant system. So, um, are you able to talk about self versus non-self and how the immune system might know what to attack and what to protect?
Oh, it's so interesting. So I would say our understanding of self versus non-self and what is necessary to prompt the immune system to respond versus induce tolerance to things has evolved also. But one of the earliest ideas was that the immune system sort of was educated about what was self during development. And then if it encountered something that was not self, it would attack it. But even when that theory was the prominent theory, it was pretty well or not pretty well. People kind of saw holes in that. For example, a big thing was if you're trying to induce an immune response against a pathogen by vaccination, it was understood super early on that you couldn't just inject dead something. You couldn't just inject a protein from a bacteria all by itself and think that that was going to stimulate an immune response. And so vaccines were changed so that there would be something called an adjuvant, a helper to get the immune system interested. And it took a while, but eventually now we've settled on, okay, definitely the adaptive immune system is educated on what is self and what is not. And that is a big important part of protecting us from autoimmune attacks. But it isn't just that. Um, there also, in order to get the immune system to respond, there needs to be some sort of danger signal, and that can be inappropriate cell death. That can be pattern recognition receptors on innate cells sensing, oh, this is bacteria. Um, and then there's also some stuff happening once a T cell and a B cell has developed out in the periphery, like out in the lymph nodes and spleen, where even at that point, if there's a T cell that's autoreactive to, say, I don't know, insulin, like in type 1 diabetes, there's other cells called regulatory T cells that actually can suppress that response too. And so for people who have an autoimmune condition, there's probably sort of a slip up both in T cell development, perhaps, and also some of the things that protect us from autoimmunity out in the periphery. And I always like to think about regulatory T cells in autoimmune conditions. But there's also interesting things where even just the failure of macrophages to clear dead self cells, if they don't clear those in a certain kind of rate, then the lingering of dead material, dead cell material, can actually be a trigger for autoimmune conditions like lupus. So we don't always think about all the different ways, all the things that go into kind of a tolerant, immune ready state. And by tolerant, I mean tolerant to self and tolerant to allergens, yet ready to respond to pathogens.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Okay, so I'm gonna bookmark talking about the lymphatic system and spleen. And then with autoimmunity, well, the thing that I think is amazing is I always want to check the things I tell people review.
I love
But
it.
I talk about this is the microbes world, and it's the job of our immune system to figure out how to live in it. Um,
Yeah.
and so, like that idea that we need to have this really powerful attack kill system that then needs to know what to what is safe, what is friend, is what is foe. And autoimmunity can be this breakdown in anywhere from like the identification, the innate processes, the failure to resolve the inflammation, not having the genetics to do any of those processes or upregulate T regulatory cells. And it's just so fascinatingly complicated, honestly, that we're not just melting down ourselves all the time, that, that we're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I love how you put that it's the microbes world and we have to exist in it. I think that's a really great perspective and so true.
That's so cool. Yeah, when we first discovered microbes, we're like, microbes are bad because we identified these infections. But honestly, most of it's, yeah, it's the microbes world.
Most of it's beneficial or neutral. Yeah.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to explain the lymphatic and the spleen, the lymphatic system and spleen, that kind of that circulation for people. We'll get into this, then we'll get into the specifics of your research. And I'm not sure if you want to at all, just very generically kind of help people understand how vaccines work, because I know there's a lot of controversy about that. So that's two topics to talk about, whichever you want to, if you're able to
Yeah.
address that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I'll say something very brief about the lymphatics and spleen, and then I'll talk about vaccines.
Appreciate
Um, So, when we think about our bodies, I think we're all pretty familiar with our heart pumping blood, and that's, a set of vessels that are under pressure and that things are transported in our blood, namely, oxygen and nutrients to all our cells and tissues. But if you think about it, you can't just always have the faucet on if there was no drain. Like things wouldn't work right. So our bodies have a second set of vessels and tubes, the lymphatic system, which I like to tell my students is like the drain. If the heart is the faucet of a sink, then the lymphatic system is the drain. And it's not under pressure. It is gravity. It works through gravity. Um, and our immune cells will drain, like that cut on your finger that I was talking about at the beginning. The innate cells that are in there will actually drain from wherever your infection is to the closest lymph node through the lymphatics. So the immune cells do move quite a bit in the lymphatic system as well. And to tie the spleen in, I'm not sure if this is what you were getting at, but um, those lymph nodes that I mentioned, they are really important communication sites whenever you have an infection in a local part of your body. So, that cut on your finger, your closest lymph node, I'm not certain, but I think it might be in the armpit. And that's where a lot of the immune activation is going to happen. And then those immune cells are going to move back to the finger. But if you would have, and this would be very bad, you definitely don't want to have an infection in your blood. But if you do have an infection in your blood, then the spleen is the place where the immune
Okay.
communication will happen.
I couldn't remember if there was a connection with. I'm trying to think because like the way I'm tell me if this is right or wrong. I think I'm just, instead of this being like a podcast for the people, I'm just like, can I check out all the things I
Yeah,
can
please.
remember from immunology? But like, so the is the defense mounted like in the blood, or in the, how does the immune cells get to the site of infection? Because I know that it's drained to lymphatics. Yeah.
I love that question. So if you're talking about T cells, for example, my favorite cell, they are moving through the blood, lymph node to lymph node all the time. Also the spleen, also immune tissues, I guess I should say,
Okay.
all the time, kind of checking in to see if their pathogen has been brought there by an innate cell. And for most adaptive cells, that's going to be their life. They're not ever going to be activated, thank goodness. But if we do have an infection, then where the T cell will get activated would be the lymph node or the spleen or Peyer's patches, immune tissue for sure, not the site of infection. And then let's say it's a helper T cell that needs to go back to the site of infection to kind of goose some macrophages to get them to kill some bacteria better. Then after they're activated in the lymph node, they get into the bloodstream. And so we use our pump to get the immune cells to the tissue. And the innate cells that are at the site of infections, they are secreting a little breadcrumb trail that T cells have a receptor for, that it pulls them out of the blood and into the tissue where they can then do their job.
You do such a good job of making this understandable, like breadcrumbs and, yeah, surveillance, and yeah, it's so brilliant. Okay, awesome. And just a complete aside, like from a clinical perspective, I'd like to remind people that your lymphatics don't pump themselves. And so when people are like, what supplement or whatever can I do to support my immune system and detox, detox is a popular word. I'm like, pump your lymphatics, go move your body, breathe,
Yeah.
exercise, sweat, open your pores, get things pumping, which I mean, completely, we won't necessarily get into this, but will stimulate a lot of different immune activity, hormone regulation, all kinds of other things. So I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
and it's
So many
free.
benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. I really appreciate that. Anything else about that before you can give us a general explanation on how vaccines work?
I think that's good. We can always jump back to it if it
Yeah.
seems appropriate. Uh,
Thank you.
so vaccines, let me see how to approach it. Well, you know, we mentioned at the start of our conversation how if you get an infection, and we talked about a cut in the finger, but the same thing could be true if you had a respiratory infection. You have those innate cells that are responding early and they're trying to hold the fort down.
Hmm.
That is a lot of the time. That is the time in an infection that we have acquired in the wild where we do not feel good. Because the way that the innate immune cells are, holding down the fort until we can get our adaptive cells activated is they are promoting inflammation. And I think most people have some knowledge of what inflammation is. They don't like it. We try to, we don't want so much inflammation a lot of the time. And that's what makes us feel sick, actually, when we have an infection. It's rarely something that the pathogen itself is doing, it's usually that innate immune response. So, what's great about vaccines is that we formulate them so that we can stimulate an adaptive immune response. So that means getting T and B cells activated against the pathogen. But because it's such a small dose of, sometimes it's just a set of proteins from the pathogen, sometimes it's heat-killed pathogen. Um, Now, with mRNA vaccines, it's a piece of mRNA that encodes for a part of the pathogen. Um, we get the benefit of skipping that kind of not very fun period of feeling sick with the innate immune response and going straight to the adaptive T and B cell response. And what I think is really, and there's more, so much more we could say, but I think what's really important for people to understand is that it really is not all that different from when you encounter a pathogen in the wild. The difference being we're controlling the dose. It's teeny tiny amounts. We're being very specific about what else comes along with it to get the right kind of immune response going. And then we haven't talked about this at all, but the thing that's also really powerful about adaptive immunity, T and B cell immunity, and I know you know this, is that I mentioned in the beginning, if we have a million billion T cells, only one or two can respond to HIV or malaria or influenza or whatever. Um, but once you've either acquired that infection in the wild or had a vaccine against that pathogen, now instead of having one or two T cells or one or two B cells that are specific for each pathogen, now you're going to have hundreds to thousands, depending on what time in the immune response we're looking, that are very long-lived. They don't have that same kind of lag period that you would see in the very beginning when you first acquire an infection. They can react just right away. So they're differentiated and they're ready to go. And the great thing about that is then if you encounter that pathogen in the wild, you won't feel sick at all. And there's so much more we could say, so I'm going to let you do your brilliant question asking thing to help us figure out if there's more that would be helpful to discuss.
Um, oh, you're so kind. And I'm trying to think of the brilliant questions. I also know this, I want to make this as informative as possible. And I'm not sure. The thing I point out is that before the mid 20th century, the number one cause of death was infections. And so I know people, there's a lot of debate around vaccines right now, but literally, if you got influenza, you could die for all of human history, up until quite recently. So I kind of just point out that that's why vaccines became so popular, and why they can still be really useful, in whatever debates people might have about certain subsets of populations who may be more sensitive to different adjuvants or microbial stimulation, that, I guess I would say it's still a really important part of human history, or else we'd all be still dying of everything all the time. So yeah, it wasn't a question, but are you able to explain it all? And I don't want to put you on the spot, the difference between the mRNA and the classic vaccines?
Oh, yeah, I can talk about that. So classic vaccines, well, the very, very first vaccine would have been heat-killed pathogen. So you just boil the thing and then inject it. Um, then we move to, well, I won't give you the whole history. You
Oh
asked
man,
about
I'd love
classic
the whole history.
vaccines
Okay, yeah,
versus
no.
mRNA. But then we move to just taking parts of pathogens. So, maybe two or three proteins from a pathogen and mixing that in a tube with something that we know can get the immune response to notice it. And the thing about the mRNA vaccines is that, well, I guess to understand mRNA vaccines, we first have to mention that proteins are kind of, I like to call them the workhorse of a cell, and you can also think of them, I think, as the workhorse of an organism. If something's getting done in an organism, 9 times out of 10, it's because a protein is getting it done. So they're kind of,
Molecules.
what's that?
Molecules.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, So, in order to get to a protein, you have to have genetic material. And for us, that genetic material is DNA. And then in between DNA and getting to a protein that's going to go off and do something, you have this intermediate molecule called RNA. And so, what's really cool about these mRNA vaccines is that we're able to create a specific sequence of RNA pretty easily in a lab, and we can change it really quickly if, for example, a new pathogen arises that we've never seen before. So that's what makes the very first thing that makes mRNA vaccine so exciting is that it's just so much easier to pivot to different pathogens using this technology because we're pretty good at making mRNA in specific sequences that code for proteins that we know are part of a pathogen. So all the vaccine is basically that's different is instead of the protein itself, we are putting in the vaccine a piece of RNA that is the directions to make the protein. So when that gets in our body, our cells will use that message to make the protein, and then the immune system responds to it.
Thank you. That was so brilliant. I don't know if, yeah, I guess we'll just leave vaccines at that because I kind of just like to provide lots of information. But does it basically it allows the scientists to make more different types of vaccines faster.
Yes. Yeah. And that's so important. It also is quicker and cheaper because some vaccines, initial vaccines, in many cases, were grown in chicken eggs, which then, if you have an egg allergy, you have to be careful about that. So this different process to make mRNA vaccines solves a lot of problems.
That's awesome. Thank you. I feel like I just want to like have you as my go-to explanation of anything immunology, just like little 5-minute videos.
It would be so fun. I would love to, you can just call me.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
But
Yeah.
I do want to tell you, if people are interested in reading a really balanced book about vaccines it's not sciencey, it's written by an English professor. It's called Immunity, or what is it called? The author is Eula Biss,
I'll look it up.
Biss, and I think it's called On Immunity and Inoculation. And she
Awesome.
talks about this, it was written pre-COVID, so it's not the most recent book ever written.
Okay.
But she talks about her own experience as a new mother, making decisions about vaccinating her baby. And I think she's pretty balanced about being fair to people who are sort of scared of vaccines because of having to sift through so much information. And so I really appreciated her empathy for different groups of people. And yeah, I thought it was a great read. And
That's good.
it's not super heavy. It's not going to like explain vaccines in a sciencey way, which I think is approachable for a lot of people.
That's wonderful. I don't know if did you have to think about that at all was when you were becoming a mother?
It's interesting because when I didn't actually take an immunology class until I was already in graduate school. I
Mhm.
probably learned about immunology in my A&P class in college, but we did not go into depth and I retained very little. If I honestly, I retained nothing.
Yeah, as most people do in their undergrad.
Yeah. So I bring that up because I went to graduate school for human medical genetics, and then I was like, oh my gosh, this immune system, and I fell in love, and that's kind of my path to immunology. But I was never in graduate school, it's very focused on, cellular molecular stuff. And we didn't really talk about social issues that relate to our discipline.
Mhm.
Um, so when I was becoming a mother, I did have to kind of think about all these vaccines. And thankfully, because of my background, I found all the reading approachable and I felt able to make informed decisions. But and so for the most part that went pretty quickly. But when I was a kid, and well, you either probably,
Yeah.
we didn't get immunized against chickenpox. We had chickenpox, and
Yeah.
that was a new vaccine for my kids. And I did pause for a second and say, wait, why is it necessary to vaccinate them against chickenpox? Um,
Right.
but but I did get them vaccinated, and I won't go on and on about this, but I have someone in my life who had a pretty significant chickenpox infection when they were a teenager that kind of impacted their athletic career. And, some people
Yeah.
have some pretty bad experiences. So,
Yeah, I had a friend who, as an adult, had a really severe recurrence of varicella zoster, and has permanent nerve damage from it.
oh
So,
no.
so shingles vaccines and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And I'm sure for every story, I could say maybe someone has a story on the other side of things, but um, yeah, maybe I mean, I think honestly, I won't even get into it, but yeah, considering the number of vaccinations that are happening, and then we look at the, previous before the 21st century, the amount of deaths that used to happen from infectious disease, statistically, it would be a reasonable thing to consider. I guess as
Oh,
strong a
for
thing as them,
sure.
I'll say.
One last thing about this, and
Yeah,
then we can pivot.
yeah,
I think that it's a pretty well-known problem in public health generally that the better your public health policies work, and of course, vaccination's a huge public health tool, the less buy-in you end up getting from the public because there's no longer fear of the thing that the policy or the tool is protecting you from. And so, that's
yeah.
just always a problem in public health.
Yeah, in some places in the world, they want, filtered water with chlorine, antibiotics, vaccines, birth control, and then we have the honor and privilege to understand, okay, maybe I want even better choices than that and reject those things. But I feel like it's important to understand their role in getting us here. And to me, it's a little bit like, and I mean this in a very compassionate way, but like if you have a mental health condition and you're on medications and now you feel very normal, sometimes it can feel like you don't need your medications anymore.
Yes. Yes.
But anyway, I know that's a bigger topic. I don't want to blow up too much, but I really wanted to hear your explanation of everything from a very scientific perspective, so I appreciate it. So yeah, that's a great actually pivot to, yeah, I forgot to ask this time. Tell me how you got into your area, and then I want to hear about your current research focus, and we can dive into all of that.
All right, sounds good. Well, as I mentioned, I didn't take an immunology class in college, but I loved genetics. I still love genetics. I just thought it was so beautiful how it works. Like it's just so elegant. So, as you know, in graduate school, when you get there, you rotate through different labs. Um, I loved every lab I rotated in. It was very hard, to try to decide. But the reason I ended up rotating into an immunology lab was that um, I was in a genetics lab who was looking for a gene that we thought was probably on chromosome 21 that was protective against cancer, and we had narrowed it down to a certain region. And my professor in that lab had said, kind of in a kidding way, please God, don't let it be an immunology gene because you get it to a locus and then it could be anything. You don't know what these genes are going to do. And I, not knowing anything about the immune system, I was like, what are you talking about? Why? What? And he's like, oh, if it's an immune gene, it's just going to be a nightmare. And I was
Is it
like,
so complicated?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, well, that sounds like something that I want to learn.
Yeah. Oh, if it's complicated, I'm gonna make it my. I always jokingly, part of my life, I was like, oh, it's a complicated. I'll make it my
My
female
mission.
dog. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, really quick, the role of the immune system in cancer is a big one. And then I
Oh,
want to get back to your story and your current research, but yeah,
yeah, well, I don't really have good closure on that because I ended up rotating to an immunology lab and falling in love and studying, not falling in love with immunology.
yeah,
I did
yeah,
meet my
yeah.
husband
And
then too,
actually,
but
yeah, I know
um,
that story a little bit.
yeah, but I never did go back to the cancer lab, and I'm not sure what happened there. I don't know if they did find the gene. I don't know. I don't know what it was. Um, let's see. So that's kind of what took me to immunology
Yeah,
and
yeah,
studying autoimmunity. And yes.
yeah. And then I think you've told me your thesis isn't really what you're focused on now, but what was your thesis in grad school?
Yeah. Oh, I loved my thesis and I'm still very interested in it. The lab that I joined studied the genetics of lupus, which is incredibly more prevalent in women. It's like a 10 to 1 female to male ratio. And it's been well understood since like the 1980s that estrogens kind of vamp up the immune system, make it more kind of rigorous. I don't know what's the word, exuberant, and that testosterone kind of turns it down a little bit. And so that was kind of understood when I started my thesis, but what it seemed likely that there were specific genes that sex hormones regulate that are responsible for turning it up and turning it down. And for a disease like lupus with a 10 to 1 female to male patient ratio, it seemed like understanding what those genes are could really have some therapeutic benefits. To make a long story short, it's not just one gene. It changes a bunch of genes in small ways and in different cell types. And I I did make some progress in that project, but nothing that I can summarize in a pithy,
Yeah.
exciting summary here. But I do continue to be interested in how sex hormones intersect with the immune system. I just think it's so interesting.
Is it ever just one? I mean, that's the like when you get to in Western science, especially with PhD, it's always supposed to you get narrower and narrower, and you're supposed to figure out the one mechanism of the one
Yes.
thing. And then clinically, people are like, okay, what's the one mechanism that's causing my thing? And I'm like, I want in a neon sign multivariate sign on my wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. It's so rare that it's one gene or one thing.
one cause. And
Yeah.
we see all the time, like every week hear women say, oh, I think it's my hormones that are causing my inflammation or my pain. And I'm like, does it happen ovulation and either before or during your menses? And it just is, you may have perfect hormonal cascades. And I always bring out my female hormone cascade month chart. And I'm like, but it's those highs and lows that
Changes.
modulate the
Yes.
immune system. So we're not going to try to change your hormones. We need to figure out the inflammation that
The
it's
targets.
exacerbating. But
Yes.
yeah, no, I'd love to. If you ever want to, I know you say it's not your focus now, but have a whole other talk about that. That's a big topic. Because yeah, like I think it's like 70% of immune autoimmunities in women, roughly. I know
That
it's different for
sounds
each
about
disease.
right. And
Yeah,
and there are a couple that are more
yeah,
prevalent in men, but the predominant
yeah,
number are more prevalent in
yeah.
women.
We're complex.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I know for both of our time schedule, let's segue into tell me about your current research. So another really popular topic around fasting, and it's very popular for a health thing, but I've always wanted to, I know that there's other things because I come back from a background of stress physiology research, um, and fasting has certain stress responses, short term and long term, that aren't beneficial.
Yes.
So I want to hear about it from an immunology perspective. Tell us about your research.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great segue. So I guess I want to start by saying that when I started looking at the impact of nutrition, and I'm going to call it malnutrition, bad nutrition on the immune system. I thought I was going to be studying calorie restriction, and I thought I was going to be studying benefits to the immune system because calorie restriction is supposed to promote longevity and it's supposed to have all these great health benefits for and in different model organisms in a lab setting. That has been shown in lots of different model organisms.
And people
Um,
talk about autophagy and upregulation of mTOR, and those are popular
yes,
topics.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
All of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
so you kind of almost went in with a bias of like, this is going to be good.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
thought, well, I thought I was anyway.
Yeah.
Um, to make a long story short, um, it didn't seem beneficial. What I was seeing did not seem beneficial. And oh, this is now at least 10 years ago, maybe now more than that, somewhere around 10 years ago. Two papers came out, and I cannot recall the authors' names. Sadly, I feel bad about that, but I can summarize kind of briefly what they show because I think this is where a lot of the disconnect between what is good and what is bad, I think is coming from. So it was two studies that came out not too far apart from each other. One was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and one was in Science. And they were both studies with non-human primates, and they were both studying calorie restriction. In one of the studies, the non-human primate control group was being fed ad libitum, meaning as much as they want, no restriction. And in that same study, the food was kind of standardized chow, like if you can imagine like pet food scoops, that kind of food. Um, that was one study. And they showed that calorie restriction in that setting was incredibly beneficial for longevity and for lots of different immune parameters. Okay. Then another study in non-human primates came out where the control group did not get ad libitum food. They were given what they needed. And the food wasn't pellets, it wasn't processed as much. And it's been a little while since I've read the paper, so I can't recall the exact details, but they sort of made the distinction that it was a more holistic sort of food source. And there, the calorie restriction group did not show so many longevity or immune health benefits. And so, certainly, more studies would need to be done. No studies, to my knowledge, have ever been done in actual humans. There are people who sort of volunteer to do calorie restriction, and they think that they are promoting longevity. And maybe they are. But it sounded more like if you don't overindulge in calories, that's good. And if you eat a variety of foods, maybe more holistic foods, that might actually be the more beneficial thing. So that's actually not my research, but that's kind of
Yeah.
what started me pivoting, I guess I should say.
I just want to be like, preach.
Yeah.
Keep preaching. Yeah. I mean, because a
Yeah.
lot of people go into this intermittent fasting as humans we tend to be kind of all or nothing, either or, and we're either being regular and eating our modern over processed diet ad libitum as much as we want, or we're going on some fast or some diet. And for most people who live a healthy lifestyle and eat a whole foods based diet and don't, have reasonable health and maybe are exercising, then perhaps maybe, and I know you won't even go this far, but I'm going to pretend to extrapolate that the benefits of calorie restriction aren't necessarily as helpful.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I have pivoted actually to looking at malnutrition. And, no, it's surprising to no one, malnutrition is definitely bad for you. Um, what I found intriguing and what I started to dig further on is that in mice, so that's the model organism I use, when you restrict calories by about 50% for a week, that fast, like, 3 to 4 days in already, immune numbers of T cells, so my favorite cell, in the lymph nodes drop. It's super fast. And they drop by about 30-ish% or more. Um, and we knew that for a little while, and I was interested in understanding how that's coordinated. Like, so we know organisms generally tend to have a sweet spot that they have evolved to have in terms of numbers of T cells, and that I think, or we think, is a certain number of T cells. Each one is slightly different from the other. And there's a certain number that's kind of a sweet spot for making sure you're protected against any pathogen that you might encounter, but not such an energy drain to keep some huge number of T cells alive that you may never need. But then if you are taking in less calories, then it's you can't keep all these immune cells alive and that number shrinks. And I was very interested to understand what links caloric intake with T cell number. And I never dreamed that we were going to uncover something that preserved T cell number. I thought we were just looking at a very straightforward mechanism, and I just wanted to define it. But we saw pretty quickly that even though the numbers of T cells in your lymph nodes or in mouse lymph nodes go down, this also happens in humans. Um, um, the number of T cells in the bone marrow, which is not a place where our T cells that are not responding, that have not already responded to infection would go, goes up. And so now we are putting all of our effort into understanding what's happening to naive T cells in the bone marrow during malnutrition. Why are they going there? What's happening to them there? And we think, and we need more evidence for this still, but our hypothesis is that the naive T cells are going to the bone marrow as a way to sort of preserve them during malnutrition. It's not perfect, like the total number of T cells will still be lower, but it isn't as low as it would be if these T cells hadn't had some sort of protective mechanism going on. And we think that that time in the bone marrow is part of the reason why people who are malnourished, their immune response is poor. And we think it's because that time in the bone marrow is causing the T cells to kind of become, we call it super quiescence. Naive T cells already don't consume a lot of energy, thankfully, but during malnutrition in the bone marrow, we have some evidence to think that these T cells are consuming even less energy and are even less responsive than they would normally be. And that sort of incredibly reduced responsiveness is part of the reason why people who are malnourished are more susceptible to infection and have worse outcomes after infection.
Yeah, that's huge. That's fascinating. So, kind of just to remind anyone listening, the T cells are needed to have appropriate responses to infections. And so, with caloric restriction or malnutrition, not just restriction, they basically go to the garage
Yes.
into storage where they can't really be as useful in going after pathogens. That's
Well, and one thing we do not know, so they're going to the bone marrow, but we can't say they're parking there.
okay.
They may just be taking an altered route and whereas they normally wouldn't go to the bone marrow at all, they do seem to go there. I don't know for sure. I don't think they're staying there. I think they still circulate, but we're still doing some studies to understand that better.
So they're still potentially patrolling and looking, as they were before, trying to be like, hey, is there an infection here? Do we need to mount a response? But maybe, and again, correct me when I'm trying to just make it even more layperson. But they go back to the bone marrow. So even though they're patrolling, they may not be able to then mount that response as well.
Yeah,
Maybe.
there's lower numbers of them out in the lymph nodes at any given time. So that's makes things worse because what
Yeah.
if the T cell you need is not there? And the other thing that makes it worse is when these malnourished T cells are in the lymph node and they do encounter a pathogen that matches their T cell receptor, they don't make enough copies of themselves. A really big important job that T cells have is to secrete signaling molecules called cytokines.
Yeah.
And there's tons and tons of data saying that malnourished T cells have weird cytokine responses, like usually worse
Yep.
responses.
It's almost sometimes you hear people who are really run down say that they don't get much of a fever or, mount much of it. They kind of always get little sniffles and stuff. But yeah, I have to say it's really hard not to anthropomorphize the immune system. I want to be like, it's like they're like, if I was malnourished, I wouldn't be doing my job very well
Yeah.
either, like,
Well,
yeah,
that works too because we are our body is sort of limited with the energy that we consume, right? And
yeah,
so it has to hand out that energy in
yeah.
packets to the systems that are prioritized. And when you're malnourished, the immune system gets a little bit of a docking,
Yeah.
so does your reproductive system.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We know that women will lose their periods or become irregular or have decreased fertility. Yeah,
Hmm.
we're just kind of an economic spreadsheet in here
That's
trying to
right.
fill out the bucks. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And I mean, I know most of the American population, I think we're at 50% are obese and 70% are overweight, or I think that's about what the American population is. We double check my statistics. So it's not, our issues are more on the other side of things, but then a lot of health conscious people, or even a lot of people who are struggling with the obesity epidemic personally, I think are, not getting the right message that they think that these fasts are going to be the way to cure everything. And if you're both over consuming processed food and then doing these fasts, you kind of might be getting, some negative of both. I know for
Hmm.
truly overweight people, it's a much different response to malnutrition than normal weight. I guess that's another thing. Maybe you should start out with really overweight mice and see what happens. I mean, you have probably all normal weight mice anyway, just random thought.
Yeah, that's a whole nother area of exploration. We haven't
Never
gone
mind.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
never mind. I just thought about that because I bet it would be interesting.
I
Yeah,
do want to say, and I know you know this too, our society makes it really hard for people.
yes.
It makes it really hard for people who aren't some idealized weight to feel good about themselves and to eat normal amounts of food because there's a lot of judgment and a lot of shame. And I think a big thing that we can do in addition to scientific research about these topics is to really counter that messaging. We have cloaked it in these terms of what's healthy and what's not healthy. But, most people aren't really that concerned with other people's health.
Yeah,
Not
it's not
really
the
that
health of people
concerned
that
with
pay attention
strangers' health,
to.
but it's odd how concerned we are about a stranger's body shape.
Yeah.
It's just so silly. And I'm working really hard to try to counter that as much as I can in society when it comes up. And it comes up a lot.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I'm that redirection. We're starting a class in January called the Fitness Lab, the Longevity and Fitness Lab. And the entire thing about it is the weight industry, the weight loss industry is lying to you. The science and research around once you gain excess adiposity, and I say it that way because I think the words fat is
Yeah.
can be a dirty word and weight can be a dirty word. There's this myth that if you just do these things right, you're going to reverse the landscape and the ecosystem of your body that has undergone these previous changes. And it's, for the most part, not true. And so we're trying to get people, me, to focus on metrics like VO2 max, um, and maybe body composition, but even that can be hard to change. But VO2 max being a measure of oxygen utilization of cells. And if you embark on a fitness program and improve your VO2 max into good or excellent, and you decrease your body fat composition by a few points and increase your muscle mass composition, your weight
That's
might not change that
amazing.
much. You're not going to become some whatever version of
Barbie
aesthetics
doll.
pleasing, but VO2 max is the single best predictor of decreasing all cause mortality. Weight be darned. And so, yeah, I'm really trying to get people off of the concept of weight. So not to
Yeah,
preach that
no,
too
that's
much, but
so awesome. I love that. I'm so glad you're doing that. That's
yeah,
so
thank
great to
you.
hear.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that. And, stop. I know there is roles and stuff for different fasting stuff, but again, having people like you help explain the science behind it, the complexity, everything's multivariate, and, whole foods diet and exercise. We can
Yeah.
talk a long time, but when you come down to it, whether your body shape changes or, anything else, that's the foundation.
Yeah, and we also our culture promotes this idea that if you just have the ideal body shape, then you'll be happy. But
Right.
I think we all know this, but I just want to point out the obvious that when you're hungry, it's really hard to be happy. And so those fasting regimens, there's other things to consider. I guess I'll just say.
I don't mean to make a joke about this serious subject, but I'm like, so if I am hungry all the time, I'll live longer. What Dante's level of hell is
I
that?
know.
Are you
I
kidding me?
know.
Oh my
I
goodness.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'll speak and then I know we both only have a couple minutes. So I want to make sure we get all the final stuff in. Um, So about, oh shoot, you were saying, let me gather my thoughts here for a second. Wait. Oh, the idea humans are not capable of calorie restriction. It's a biological fallacy. It's no way to live. Dieting doesn't work. You will always, the thing I point out is that humans absolutely did have famine and feast cycles. It can be normal to go through that. But almost any animal, given our access to food, will eat till they're overweight. It's not a character flaw. It doesn't mean you're a
Yes.
bad person. We live in this really, like if you put a dog in a room with unlimited amount of food, most of them will eat themselves like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What are humans but in a house full of, surrounded by unlimited food? So I just like to point out there's nothing personally wrong with a person. It's just a kind of a weird human experiment we're running in these days and times where we have unlimited access to all this processed food. So
It's very tasty
it's very tasty. They
and
do it.
manufactured to be that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to make sure what's your next path then with the research you're doing? What are you guys looking into next?
I love this. Um, we just completed a study where we isolated naive T cells from the bone marrow of malnourished mice as well as well-nourished mice and looked specifically for gene expression differences in the naive T cells. And we got some interesting genes out of that. Not very many, a total of actually only two.
Oh,
But
that's
the good news is I can follow up on two genes. And one of them is a gene that's regulated by glucocorticoids, the stress hormone, which we didn't even get into, but there's tons and tons about that. And I'm really excited to kind of start exploring what are the molecular mechanisms that are triggering these changes and to really test the idea if those naive T cells really are in this super quiescent state that I've kind of coined. I think the genes that I've found support the idea, but I need the evidence.
So you're going to try to knock out that glucocorticoid receptor and see what happens?
Well, so it's not the so
Okay.
we've done experiments where
Okay.
T cells don't have the glucocorticoid receptor during malnutrition and they don't go to the bone marrow. So we know that's
Oh,
glucocorticoid regulated.
so
And then there's
exciting.
this gene I found that's regulated by glucocorticoids that I think might be the gene that's responsible for it. So I'm
That's
going to knock that gene out. It's called
oh,
PILZ, if I remember correctly.
PILZ. Roughly, what does it do? What's insurance? Sorry.
Uh, I should have brushed. My brain has been directed elsewhere. We're trying to write up the paper
Oh,
about
you're
the
great.
results that
I
we've
could just
already
ask you a
done.
million
So
questions all day long,
I
so you're fine.
honestly can't recall.
That's totally fine. Yeah, no, I mean, if I remember correctly, I mean, like glucocorticoids, there's glucocorticoid receptors on every cell of the body. So
I don't know if they're on every cell, but they are on T cells. I know that for
T
sure.
cells. I'll check myself. I feel like I remember that, but
That's
that was 20
super
plus years
broad.
ago. It's a real important hormone.
Yes, yes, yes.
Exciting. Oh, so that's really exciting. Well, anything else you want to make sure kind of there's some take-home messages for people about the immune system, about fasting, and then I'll let you have the rest of your day.
Um, no, I think actually the wrap it up segments that you sort of did after each short little conversation piece that we had in here was really valuable and helpful. And I think I couldn't say it better than you did. So
Well,
I,
you're
I
so
think
kind.
we've got it.
Yeah, your students are so if your students ever listen, your students are so lucky to have you. I mean, the way you make this understandable and explainable, this is an incredibly complex, hard to understand topic. And I just so appreciate your time and hopefully we'll get to talk some more subjects with you if you have the time in the future too. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Tressa, and your patients are lucky to have you.
You're so kind. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Melanie Gubbels-Bupp, at Randolph-Macon College, immunology professor. I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday and I'll probably talk to you soon.
Wonderful. You too. Thank you so much,
Thank
Tressa.
you. Take care.
Bye-bye.